Amora thought she was safe. For 3 years she had been a ghost, hiding in the grime of a human city to escape a fate worse than death. The breeder's mark. She scrubbed dishes until her hands bled, wore a uniform that smelled of stale grease, and swallowed bitter illegal potions to suppress the wolf clawing at her insides. She was invisible. She was free. Until they walked in. The Blood Moon twins, Alpha Velkin and Alpha Bardolph, the ruthless monsters of the North. One mistake, a shattered vial of masking potion, changed everything. The scent hit the air. The growl shook the room. And the moment golden eyes locked onto hers, Amora realized the terrifying truth. You can run from your pack, but you can never outrun your fate. Chapter 1. The air in the kitchen of Louv's diner was thick enough to chew. It tasted of burnt coffee, old frying oil, and the kind of despair that settled into the pores and refused to scrub out. Amora stood at the industrial sink, her hands submerged in water so hot it turned her skin a raw, angry red. But she didn't pull back. The pain was grounding. It was a sharp physical reminder that she was here, in the human world, and not back in the gilded cage of the Silver Claw pack. She scrubbed a plate with frantic intensity, the steel wool biting into the ceramic. 3 years, she counted silently, matching the rhythm of her breathing to the scrubbing. 1,095 days. That was how long it had been since she had fled into the night, barefoot and bleeding, escaping the ceremony that would have ended her life as an individual. She could still feel the phantom heat of the branding iron hovering inches from her skin. The breeder's mark. Alpha Tidwolf didn't want a mate. He wanted a broodmare. He wanted her bloodline, her rare genetics, and her submission. A sharp cramp seized her stomach, doubling her over against the cold metal of the sink. Amora gasped, dropping the plate into the soapy water. It was happening again. The itch. It started in her marrow, a vibrating, clawing sensation that felt like millions of ants marching beneath her skin. Her inner wolf was waking up, fighting the suppressants she had been forcing down her throat for years. The wolf hated the cage. It hated the silence. It wanted to howl, to shift, to run until its paws bled. But shifting meant releasing her scent, and releasing her scent meant death. Amora squeezed her eyes shut, beads of cold sweat mixing with the steam on her forehead. "Not now," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, not now." She needed the potion. The small glass vial hidden in the pocket of her apron was the only thing keeping her hidden. It was a vile, muddy concoction she bought from a back-alley witch in the city's underbelly, costing her nearly every tip she made. It tasted like ash and rotted lemons, but it masked the one thing she couldn't hide: the scent, the curse, the smell that drove male shifters into a possessive, mindless frenzy. With trembling hands, Amora dried herself on a greasy rag and rushed toward the employee bathroom. The diner was busy for a Tuesday night, the clatter of silverware and the murmur of voices drifting through the swinging doors, but she barely heard it. Her vision blurred at the edges. The wolf was pushing harder today, fueled by the impending full moon. She burst into the cramped bathroom and locked the door, leaning against it to keep her legs from giving out. Her fingers fumbled for the vial in her pocket. She pulled it out, the glass cool against her feverish skin. Just a few drops, she told herself, her breathing ragged. Just enough to kill the scent, just enough to stay invisible. But her hands were shaking too hard. The tremors of the suppression withdrawal racked her body. As she tried to uncork the vial, her grip slipped. Time seemed to warp, stretching into a horrifying slow motion. Amora watched, paralyzed, as the vial tumbled from her fingers. She lunged for it, but she was too slow. Crack. the sound was sickeningly loud in the small tiled room. The vial shattered against the floor, exploding outward. The dark, muddy liquid, her shield, her safety, her freedom, splashed across the dirty grout and seeped instantly into the cracks. Amora dropped to her knees, ignoring the shards of glass that bit into her skin. She tried to scoop it up, to salvage even a single drop, but it was gone. The harsh chemical smell of the potion rose up, mocking her, before dissipating into the air. She stared at the stain, her heart hammering a frantic, broken rhythm against her ribs. She had no money for more. She had no way to contact the witch until Friday. And out there, beyond the bathroom door, the world was full of predators who would smell a lone, unmasked female from miles away. Amora sat back on her heels, her hands slick with useless residue and her own blood. For the first time in 3 years, she was completely exposed. Chapter 2. Amora stayed on the bathroom floor for 5 minutes, hyperventilating. She tried to convince herself it would be okay. It was a Tuesday. No wolves came to this part of the city. This was the human sector, the gritty industrial district where shifters rarely deigned to tread. If she just kept her head down, stayed in the kitchen, and scrubbed enough bleach on her skin, maybe she could mask the scent herself. Maybe, she thought, standing up on shaky legs. Maybe luck is finally on my side. But as she unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back into the kitchen, the universe laughed at her. Outside, the sky broke open. A crack of thunder shook the foundation of the diner, rattling the plates stacked on the metal shelves. The rain, which had been a drizzle all evening, transformed into a torrential downpour, hammering against the roof like gunfire. Then, the bell above the front entrance chimed. It was a cheerful, innocent sound. Ding-ling. But the effect it had on the room was immediate and terrifying. The air pressure in the diner plummeted. It wasn't just the storm. It was something biological. The fine hairs on Amora's arms stood straight up. A chill raced down her spine, triggering every survival instinct she possessed. The kitchen staff, all human and oblivious, didn't look up from the grill, but Amora froze. She knew that feeling. She felt it in her teeth. Alphas. Not just 1. 2. Amora pressed herself against the wall near the swinging doors, trying to make herself small, peering through the small, circular window into the dining room. 2 men had just walked in, bringing the storm with them. They took up too much space. That was the first thing she noticed. The diner was cramped and worn, full of vinyl booths and laminate tables. But these men looked like gods who had descended to slum it with mortals. They were massive, well over 6'4", with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of expensive, tailored Italian suits. Rainwater dripped from their dark coats, pooling on the linoleum floor, but they didn't seem to notice the cold. They stood with a lethal, predatory stillness, scanning the room not like customers looking for a seat, but like generals surveying a battlefield. The man on the left, Alpha Velkin, had hair blacker than a raven's wing, slicked back from a face that was all sharp angles and harsh lines. His energy was a clenched fist, ready to strike. He looked bored, dangerous, and utterly terrifying. The man on the right, Alpha Bardolph, was his mirror image. But where Velkin was fire and aggression, Bardolph was ice and calculation. His hair was a shade lighter, a dark brown, and his eyes moved with a terrifying intelligence, cataloging every face, every exit, every threat in the room. Amora stopped breathing. She recognized them, not from person but from the hushed whispers of other runaway wolves she had passed in the underground. The Blood Moon twins, the kings of the north. They were the executioners of the shifter world. They didn't have a pack. They had an army, and they were known for one thing above all else. They shared everything: power, kills, territory. Why are they here? Amora's mind raced, panic clawing at her throat. Did Tidwolf send them? Did he pay the North to hunt me down? She pulled back from the window, her heart beating so loudly she was sure they could hear it across the room. She needed to leave. She needed to run out the back door right now. "Amora!" The shout made her jump a foot in the air. Louv, the diner's formidable manager, was standing at the service counter, glaring at her. Louv was a human woman in her 60s with skin like leather and a voice like a foghorn. She had no idea that monsters were standing 10 feet away from her. "Stop hiding in the corner and work," Louv barked, slamming a coffee pot down. "Table 4 needs service. They look like big tippers. Move it." Amora shook her head frantically, her eyes wide. "Louv, I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please let me stay in the kitchen. Send Jenkins." Louv narrowed her eyes. "Jenkins is on a smoke break. And I'm not paying you to act like a frightened rabbit. Take the pad. Take the water. Go." There was no room for argument. Louv shoved the order pad into Amora's chest. Amora clutched it like a shield, her knuckles turning white. She had no choice. If she ran now, it would draw attention. If she acted normal, maybe, just maybe, the smell of the frying bacon and the stale coffee would be enough to hide her. She took a deep, shuddering breath, pushed open the swinging doors, and stepped out of the safety of the kitchen, walking straight into the lion's den. Chapter 3. The walk to table 4 felt like walking to the gallows. Every step Amora took was a battle against her own legs, which wanted to turn and sprint in the opposite direction. She kept her head down, her chin tucked into her chest, letting her messy hair fall forward like a curtain to hide her face. "Be invisible," she chanted internally. "You are just a waitress. You are human. You are nothing." The twins had chosen a booth near the window, away from the other patrons. As Amora approached, the atmosphere grew heavier, hotter. They radiated a furnace-like heat that reached her from 3 feet away, a sure sign of powerful alphas. It was suffocating. She stopped at the edge of the table, refusing to look up. She stared resolutely at the polished tips of their leather shoes. "Welcome to Louv's," she mumbled, her voice sounding thin and reedy to her own ears. Can I start you with drinks?" There was a pause, a silence that stretched too long. Amora could feel their eyes on her. It felt like a physical weight, a touch that skittered over her skin. "Coffee." "Black," the first one said. "Velkin." His voice was a low tectonic rumble that vibrated deep in Amora's chest. It was the voice of a man used to giving orders and having them obeyed instantly. He sounded bored, but there was an undercurrent of irritation, like the storm outside was bothering him. "And 2 steaks, rare," the second one added. Bardolph. His voice was smoother, lighter than his brother's, but infinitely more dangerous. It was silk, wrapped around a dagger. Amora risked a glance upward, just for a second, to write down the order. Velkin was looking out the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, his jaw set tight. He looked like he wanted to murder the weather. But Bardolph was watching her. He wasn't looking at her face. He was watching her hands as they trembled over the notepad. He was watching the pulse frantically beating in her jugular. His eyes were a dark, stormy gray, intelligent and piercing. He tilted his head slightly, like a wolf trying to solve a puzzle. "Rare," Amora repeated, scribbling nonsense on the paper just to keep her hands moving. "Anything else?" "Water," Bardolph said softly. "You look like you need it more than we do." The comment made her blood freeze. Did he know? Did he suspect? Right away, she whispered. She grabbed the pitcher from her tray and poured 2 glasses of ice water. Her focus was fracturing. The wolf inside her was scratching at the door, sensing the proximity of such immense power. It wanted to submit. It wanted to bare its throat. Amora bit her tongue so hard she tasted copper, using the pain to stay in control. She set the first glass down in front of Velkin. He didn't move. She set the second glass down in front of Bardolph. As she pulled her hand back, her pinky finger accidentally grazed the back of Bardolph's hand resting on the table. Snap. It wasn't just a static shock. It was a gunshot of energy. A visible spark of blue electricity arced between their skin, loud enough to be heard over the drumming rain. The jolt traveled up Amora's arm, straight to her heart, causing it to stutter and skip a beat. Bardolph flinched, his hand twitching. Velkin's head snapped away from the window instantly. His attention zeroed in on the table, his boredom vanishing. He looked at his brother, then he looked at Amora. The intensity of his gaze was like a physical blow. "What was that?" Velkin demanded, his voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of humanity. Amora snatched her hand back, clutching it to her chest. "Static," she gasped, backing away. "It's just the storm, the dry air. I'm sorry." But she knew it wasn't the storm, and by the way the twins were suddenly sitting very, very still, they knew it too. Chapter 4. The spark had done something. It had broken the seal. Amora backed away toward the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed to get out. She needed to leave the state. She needed to run. But as she retreated, the swinging doors of the kitchen opened behind her, and a blast of hot air from the grill hit her back. The heat acted like a catalyst. Without the potion to suppress it, and triggered by the electrical contact with a powerful male, Amora's natural scent bloomed. It didn't just seep out, it exploded. One moment, the diner smelled of grease, coffee, and wet wool. The next, the air was saturated with her. It was a scent that defied logic. It was the sweet, creamy warmth of vanilla bean, the intoxicating richness of wild honey, and the sharp, fresh ozone of a summer storm. It was a scent that promised paradise. It was a scent that promised home. Amora froze. She could smell it on herself, thick and cloying. "Oh, God," she thought. "It's over." The scent drifted across the room, cutting through the diner smells, and hit table 4. The reaction was visceral. Velkin and Bardolph went rigid. Their spines snapped straight, their muscles locking up as the biological imperative slammed into them with the force of a freight train. Velkin's nostrils flared, inhaling deep, greedy lungfuls of the air. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gray of his irises until his eyes were black pits of obsession. The fork he had been holding snapped in half in his grip, the metal twisting like paper. Bardolph gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. The wood groaned and splintered under his fingers. He closed his eyes for a second, a shudder racking his massive frame, as if he were fighting for control, and losing. The silence in the diner seemed to stretch for an eternity. The other customers continued eating, oblivious to the shift in the universe. But for the 3 of them, the world had narrowed down to this single point in time. Velkin stood up. He didn't stand up politely. He rose with such violent, abrupt force that his heavy booth chair was thrown backward. It crashed onto the linoleum floor with a deafening bang that silenced the entire room. Louv looked up from the counter. "Hey, what's the—" She was cut off by a sound that no human throat could make. Velkin turned toward Amora. He was huge, terrifying, a monster in a suit. His chest heaved as he fought to drag air into his lungs. His eyes, now glowing with a faint golden rim, locked onto her face. He didn't see a waitress anymore. He didn't see a human. He saw the only thing that mattered. A low, vibrating growl tore its way out of his chest, shaking the silverware on the tables. It wasn't a question. It was a claim. It was a sentence. Mine. The single word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Bardolph stood up slowly beside his brother, his eyes fixed on Amora with the same terrifying intensity. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. He took a step toward her, inhaling sharply, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hunger. Amora looked at them, two apex predators who had just found their prey, and for the first time in her life, she knew true terror. They hadn't just found her. They had claimed her, and the blood moon never let go of what was theirs. Chapter 5. The word hung in the air like the blade of a guillotine waiting to drop. Mine. To the human customers in the diner, it might have sounded like a strange, aggressive declaration from an angry man, but to Amora, it was a death sentence. It was the sound of chains rattling. It was the echo of the cage she had spent 3 years bleeding to escape. In the shifter world, mine didn't mean love. It didn't mean romance or flowers. It meant ownership. It meant she was property to be seized, branded, and locked away. Amora's mind fractured. The logical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive in the city for 3 years, shut down completely. In its place, pure, unadulterated prey instinct took over. She didn't see the devastatingly handsome face of a fated mate. She saw the shadow of Alpha Tidwolf reaching out to drag her back to hell. They found me. The thought screamed through her mind, loud enough to drown out the thunder. Tidwolf sent them. They are here to take me back to the breeding pens. No, Amora gasped, the word tearing out of her throat as a strangled sob. She took a stumbling step back, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. Her hands, slick with sweat and fear, lost their grip on the large metal serving tray she was holding. Clang! The sound was deafening. The tray hit the linoleum floor with the force of a gunshot, shattering the heavy glass pitcher of ice water. Shards of glass exploded outward, skittering across the floor like diamonds. The noise broke the trance that had settled over the diner. Customers jumped, silverware clattered, and Louv shouted something from behind the counter. But Amora heard none of it. She saw Velkin take a step forward. He moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, reaching out a hand as if to steady her. But to Amora, it looked like a grab. She didn't wait to see if he was gentle. She spun on her heel, her shoe slipping on the wet floor and the spilled ice water. She flailed, barely catching her balance on the edge of a booth, and then she bolted. "Hey, watch it!" Louv yelled, waving a towel as Amora sprinted past the counter. "Amora, get back here!" Amora ignored her. She ignored the confused cries of the patrons. She sprinted toward the kitchen, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. She hit the swinging doors with her shoulder, bursting into the humid heat of the back of the house. "Jesus, girl!" the cook shouted, jumping back as she flew past the grill. Amora didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She could feel them behind her. She could feel their presence like a physical weight pressing against her spine. They were coming. Alphas didn't let prey run. Alphas chased. And when they caught you, they made sure you never ran again. She scrambled over a crate of onions, knocking it over in her haste, sending vegetables rolling across the greasy floor to create an obstacle. She reached the heavy metal security door at the back of the kitchen. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, slick with sweat. Open. Open. Please, God, open. She slammed her hip against the bar. The door gave way with a rusted screech, and Amora tumbled out into the night, the cold rain instantly soaking her uniform as the door slammed shut behind her. sealing her fate. Chapter 6. She transitioned from the stifling heat of the kitchen to the freezing downpour of the storm was like being slapped in the face. The rain was torrential, a solid curtain of water that blurred the world into streaks of gray and black. It soaked Amora to the bone in seconds, plastering her cheap waitress uniform to her skin and weighing her down. But she didn't feel the cold. She was running on pure adrenaline, her body flooded with the flight response of a hunted animal. Amora's boots splashed through deep puddles, sending oily water flying up her legs. She knew these streets. For 3 years, she had memorized the grid of the industrial district specifically for this moment. She knew which fences had holes in them, which dumpsters were easy to climb, and which alleys led to dead ends. She sprinted down the narrow service corridor behind the diner, her lungs burning as if she were inhaling fire. She took a sharp left, then a right, weaving through the maze of brick and concrete. I can lose them, she thought, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The rain will wash away my scent. If I keep moving, if I stay downwind, they won't be able to track me. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The alley behind her was empty. Darkness and rain swallowed the space where she had just been. There were no shouting voices, no heavy footsteps pounding the pavement, no barking dogs. Silence. That terrified her more than the noise would have. Alpha Tidwolf's enforcers were loud, clumsy brutes who howled when they hunted. But the silence. Silence meant professionals. Silence meant apex predators who didn't need to make noise to close the distance. Amora pushed harder, her muscles screaming in protest. She scrambled over a chain-link fence, the metal digging into her palms, and dropped onto the cracked asphalt of an abandoned loading dock. She was aiming for the old textile factory 3 blocks away. It had a basement with a sewer access she could use to disappear underground. She turned the corner into the cul-de-sac that led to the factory, her chest heaving, a sob of relief catching in her throat. I made it. I'm almost... She skid to a halt, her boots screeching against the wet ground. The breath left her body in a rush, leaving her hollowed out and trembling. Standing at the entrance of the cul-de-sac, blocking the only exit, were 2 massive, dark silhouettes, Velkin and Bardolph. They weren't running. They weren't panting. They weren't even wet, despite the storm raging around them. They stood side by side, their shoulders brushing, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and power. They had moved with supernatural speed, flanking her, anticipating her route with an intelligence that was terrifying. Amora stumbled back, her eyes wide. How? How had they gotten ahead of her? You are fast, little wolf, Velkin said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a calm, deep rumble that cut through the sound of the rain effortlessly. He sounded impressed, almost amused, as if this were a game of tag and not a fight for her life. Bardolph tilted his head, his gray eyes catching the reflection of a distant street lamp. But not fast enough to outrun your shadow. Amora turned to run the other way, but she realized with a sinking horror that she had made a fatal mistake. In her panic, she had turned into the wrong loading dock. Behind her was a 20-foot brick wall topped with razor wire. She was trapped. Chapter 7. Amora backed up until her spine hit the rough, cold brick of the factory wall. The grit scraped against her skin through the thin fabric of her uniform, grounding her in the terrifying reality of the moment. There was nowhere left to go. The trap had snapped shut. Desperation, sharp and jagged, clawed at her chest. If they took her back to Tidwolf, she would die. She knew that with absolute certainty. She would rather bleed out in this dirty alleyway than let anyone put a collar around her neck again. Her eyes darted around the dark, rain-slicked ground, searching for anything, A rock, a bottle, a miracle. Her fingers closed around a rusted length of iron pipe, discarded among the trash. It was heavy, cold, and rough with corrosion. It was a pathetic weapon against 2 alpha wolves, but it was all she had. She snatched it up, wielding it like a sword, her knuckles white as she gripped the metal. "Stay back!" Amora screamed. The sound was raw, tearing at her throat, lost to the rolling thunder overhead. "Don't come any closer." The twins didn't flinch. They began to walk toward her. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that was hypnotic to watch. Step for step, they closed the distance, their movements mirroring each other perfectly. The rain plastered their white dress shirts to their chests, turning the fabric translucent, revealing the sheer density of the muscle beneath. They looked like statues carved from marble in violence. 10 feet away, they stopped. The darkness of the alley couldn't hide them anymore. Velkin stepped into a patch of faint light filtering down from a security cage. His eyes were changing. The human gray was gone, consumed by a molten, glowing gold that burned in the darkness. It was the sign of an alpha on the edge of a shift, an alpha whose instincts were riding high. He looked at the pipe in her hand, then up at her face. There was no anger in his expression. There was only an intense, overwhelming focus. "Put the pipe down, Amora," Velkin commanded. His voice had changed too. It was layered with the alpha tone, a compulsion that made Amora's knees buckle, her wolf whining in submission inside her head. "We aren't going to hurt you." "Liar!" Amora spat, tears mixing with the rain on her face. She tightened her grip on the pipe, forcing her legs to lock, fighting the compulsion with everything she had. "I know what you are. I know who sent you." Bardolph stepped up beside his brother. He was calmer, his eyes still retaining a ring of gray, but his focus was sharper. He was studying her, cataloging her fear, her defensive stance, the way she favored her left leg. "We didn't come here to fight you," Bardolph said softly. He held his hands up, palms open, showing her he was unarmed. But Amora knew better. His hands were the weapons. "And no one sent us. Stop running, little wolf." "You're shivering." "I'm shivering because I'm terrified of you," she shouted back, swinging the pipe wildly to keep them at bay. "You don't need to be," Velkin growled, a flash of irritation crossing his face. Not at her, but at her fear. He took another step, ignoring the weapon. "We don't hurt what belongs to us." "I don't belong to you," Amora screamed, the panic making her reckless. "I don't belong to anyone. I won't go back to the cages. I won't be a breeder." She swung the pipe with all her strength, aiming for Velkin's head. Chapter 8. Amora swung the rusted iron pipe with every ounce of strength her terrified body could muster. It was a clumsy, desperate strike, fueled by 3 years of nightmares and the absolute certainty that she was fighting for her life. In her mind, she wasn't swinging at a handsome stranger. She was swinging at the memory of Alpha Tidwolf, at the cages, at the chains that waited for her if she failed. "I won't go back," she screamed, the cry tearing from her throat raw and guttural. "I won't be a breeder. I won't let him mark me." The pipe sliced through the rain, aiming for the dark-haired Alpha's temple. It should have connected. It should have at least forced him to flinch. But Bardolph moved. He didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply raised his hand with a speed that blurred in the dim light. Clang. The sound of metal hitting flesh, or rather flesh stopping metal cold, echoed through the alley. Bardolph had caught the iron pipe mid-swing. He gripped it in his bare hand, his fingers curling around the rusted metal just inches from his brother's face. He didn't grunt with effort. He didn't stumble. He stood like a statue. His arm extended, stopping her hysterical violence with terrifying ease. Amora gasped, the vibration of the impact jarring her arms all the way to her shoulders. She tried to yank the pipe back, to swing again, but it was immovable. It was like trying to pull a sword from a stone. "Let go!" she sobbed, panic rising to a fever pitch. "I won't do it. I won't breed for him. You can kill me right here, but I won't go back to that hell." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavier than the storm. The reaction from the twins was instantaneous and terrifying. The moment the word breeder left her lips, the atmosphere in the alley shifted from predatory pursuit to something far more volatile. Velkin's golden eyes widened, the pupils contracting into pinpricks of shock. Bardolph's expression, usually so cool and calculated, fractured. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek, and the gray in his eyes darkened to the color of a bruising storm cloud. "Breeder?" Bardolph repeated. The word sounded foreign on his tongue, like poison. His voice was deadly quiet, dropping to a register that vibrated in the soles of Amora's boots. It wasn't the growl of a hunter anymore. It was the snarl of a protector who had just discovered a wound on his charge. He looked at Velkin, a silent, furious communication passing between the twins in a split second. Then, Bardolph looked back at Amora. He wasn't looking at the weapon anymore. He was looking at the terror in her eyes, realizing for the first time that she wasn't running from them. She was running from a ghost. With a casual flick of his wrist, Bardolph wrenched the pipe from Amora's grip. He didn't use it against her. He tossed it aside into a pile of trash with a clatter, treating the heavy iron like it was made of balsa wood. He took a step closer, ignoring the way Amora flinched and pressed herself harder against the brick wall. The heat radiating off him was immense, burning through the cold rain. "Is that what you think this is?" Bardolph asked, his voice low and dangerous, though the danger was no longer directed at her. He held up his empty hands, showing her his palms. "You think we chased you down to drag you back to a breeding pit? You think we are errand boys for a slaver? You're alphas," Amora stammered, her chest heaving, confusion warring with her fear. "That's what alphas do. You take. You claim." "We are alphas," Velkin interjected, his voice rougher, thick with suppressed rage. "But we are not him." Chapter 9. The rain continued to hammer down, but the dynamic in the alley had fundamentally changed. Amora stood trembling against the wall, her hands empty, her chest heaving. The twins stood before her, not as jailers, but as a barrier against the rest of the world. Velkin stepped into the space Bardolph had left, his massive frame blocking out the wind. The golden glow in his eyes had dimmed slightly, returning to a turbulent gray gold, but the intensity remained. "Look at us, Amora," Velkin commanded. It wasn't a compulsion. It was a plea. "Look at the crest on my ring." Amora blinked, water dripping from her lashes. She forced her eyes down to his left hand. On his ring finger sat a heavy band of black steel, engraved with a symbol she recognized from the whispers of the underground, a wolf howling at a bleeding moon. She sucked in a sharp breath. "Blood moon," she whispered. "The Blood Moon Pack," Velkin confirmed, his voice hard with pride. "We are the kings of the North. We have been at war with the Silverclaw Pack for a decade. Alpha Tidwolf is our enemy. We would sooner burn his territory to ash than do his bidding." The realization hit Amora like a physical blow, staggering her. They weren't bounty hunters. They were the only wolves in the country powerful enough to kill Tidwolf. She had been running from the very people who could have saved her. "But—" Amora's voice shook, her adrenaline beginning to crash, leaving her lightheaded. "If you aren't hunting me for him, why? Why did you chase me? Why did you look at me like that in the diner?" Bardolph moved closer, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to retreat, but she didn't. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell the ozone and sandalwood clinging to his skin. "We didn't track a bounty, Amora," Bardolph said softly. His gaze dropped to her neck, where her pulse was fluttering like a trapped bird. "We didn't even know you existed until this morning." "Then how?" Amora asked, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "How did you find me?" "We felt it," Velkin answered, his voice rough with emotion. 3 towns over, a pull, a tether snapping into place. It was an ache in our chests that we couldn't ignore. It drew us here, to that specific diner, to that specific table. Bardolph reached out, his hand hovering near her face, waiting for permission. When Amora didn't pull away, he gently brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was electric, scorching her cold skin. "Our souls recognized yours before our eyes ever saw you," Bardolph murmured, the truth of his words ringing in the air. "We didn't chase prey, little wolf. We chased our mate." The word hung between them, absolute and terrified. Mate. The biological imperative. The other half of the soul. It was the rarest, most sacred bond a shifter could have, and for twins to share one, it was the stuff of legends. Amora looked from Velkin to Bardolph, seeing the mirror image of devotion in their eyes. The fear that had gripped her heart for 3 years began to loosen its claws, replaced by a shock so profound it made her knees weak. She wasn't a fugitive to them. She was their queen. Chapter 10. The adrenaline that had fueled Amora's sprint and her fight suddenly evaporated, leaving her hollowed out and trembling. The cold of the storm finally registered. Her teeth began to chatter, her body shaking violently as the shock set in. She slumped slightly against the brick wall, her legs feeling like water. Velkin moved instantly. He didn't hesitate. He shrugged off his expensive, tailored suit jacket in one fluid motion, exposing his white dress shirt to the torrential rain. The wet fabric instantly became translucent against his skin, revealing the hard ridges of muscle and the dark ink of tattoos swirling over his shoulders. But he didn't seem to feel the cold. He stepped forward and draped the heavy jacket over Amora's shoulders. "Easy," Velkin murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. He pulled the lapels together, cocooning her in his warmth. "Breathe, Amora. Just breathe." The jacket was heavy, dry on the inside, and permeated with his scent: cedar, wood smoke, and the deep, earthy musk of an alpha. The moment the scent hit her nose, something inside Amora snapped. Not in a bad way, but in a way that felt like a lock clicking into place. Her inner wolf, which had been pacing and snarling in fear for hours, suddenly dropped its hackles. It curled up in the center of her chest and let out a long, contented purr. "Safe," her wolf whispered. "Pack. Home." The biological response was overwhelming. The mating heat flared to life, a warm, golden feeling that started in her belly and spread to her fingertips, chasing away the chill of the rain. She instinctively leaned into Velkin, her nose burying itself in the collar of his jacket. Bardolph was there too, his hand resting gently on her lower back, grounding her. The static electricity that had shocked her in the diner was gone, replaced by a steady, humming current of connection. It felt like plugging into a power source after running on empty for years. Amora looked up at them, her eyes wide and vulnerable. The rain plastered her hair to her skull, but for the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. "You..." Amora's voice was a whisper, fragile as glass. "You really aren't going to take me back? You promise?" Velkin reached out, cupping her face in his large, warm hands. His thumbs brushed away the rain beneath her eyes. The ferocity he had shown earlier was gone, replaced by a tenderness that stole the breath from her lungs. "I would sooner rip my own heart out than let him touch you again," Velkin vowed, the oath heavy with alpha power. "We are taking you home, Amora," Bardolph added, his voice leaving no room for argument. "North, to the mountains, where no one can ever hunt you again." Amora let out a shuddering breath, her defenses finally crumbling. Home. The word sounded like a fairy tale. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell them she would go, to tell them she trusted them. But the universe had one last cruel twist waiting for them. Before she could say a word, the alleyway was suddenly flooded with blinding white light. High beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the rain like diamonds. Tires screeched against the wet asphalt as 3 black SUVs skidded to a halt, blocking the only exit to the cul-de-sac. The tender moment shattered instantly. Velkin and Bardolph spun around, placing themselves in front of Amora, their bodies becoming human shields. A growl ripped from both of their throats in perfect unison, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. The door of the lead SUV flew open. Chapter 11. The blinding white light of the high beams cut through the rain like a physical weapon, erasing the intimacy of the moment instantly. 1 second, Amora was safe, wrapped in the cedar-scented warmth of Velkin's jacket, shielded by the bodies of her mates. The next, she was blind. The world reduced to a wall of glare, and the aggressive mechanical growl of idling engines. 3 black SUVs had screeched into the mouth of the cul-de-sac, parking bumper to bumper to form a barricade of steel and glass. The tires hissed on the wet asphalt, steaming in the cold air. The scene looked less like an arrival and more like a military ambush. Amora flinched violently, a whimper of pure terror escaping her throat. The smell hit her before the doors even opened, a scent she had spent 3 years trying to scrub from her memory. It was the smell of wet dog, stale tobacco, and something distinctively rotten, like meat left out in the sun too long. It was the scent of the Silver Claw pack. "Stay behind us," Bardolph commanded. His voice had lost the soft, lover-like quality it held seconds ago. It was now hard, flat, and vibrating with a lethal promise. He and Velkin moved in perfect synchronization, stepping apart just enough to create a phalanx, completely obscuring Amora from view. They didn't cower from the light. They stared into it, their postures shifting from relaxed to rigid. Amora could feel the heat rolling off their backs, a furnace of aggression stoking up to dangerous levels. The doors of the SUVs flew open in unison. Boots hit the pavement, heavy military-grade combat boots. 10 men poured out into the rain, encircling the alley entrance. They were big, rough men, armed with tire irons, silver-tipped batons, and the arrogant swagger of bullies who were used to outnumbering their victims. But Amora didn't look at them. Her eyes were fixed on the man stepping out of the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. He moved slower than the others, leaning heavily on a cane topped with a silver wolf's head. He wore a long trench coat that billowed in the stormy wind. As he stepped into the halo of the headlights, the rain illuminated a face that haunted Amora's nightmares. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pulling his lip up in a permanent sneering grimace. Alpha Tidwolf. He looked older than the last time she had seen him, the gray in his beard more pronounced, but his eyes were exactly the same. Cold, dead, and filled with a cruel entitlement. He stopped 10 feet away from the twins, flanked by his enforcers. He took a moment to adjust his cuffs, smiling as if this were a social call rather than an abduction. "Well, well," Tidwolf said, his voice a rasping baritone that scratched against the sound of the rain. He clapped his hands together slowly, a mocking applause. I must admit, I'm impressed. My trackers have been scouring the eastern seaboard for 3 years without a sniff. You two wander into a diner for a steak and find her in 20 minutes. He tilted his head, trying to peer around Velkin's massive shoulder to spot Amora. Awfully kind of you boys to do my legwork for me, Tidwolf sneered, his eyes gleaming with malice. I was starting to worry my little investment had gotten herself killed, but looking at the two of you, I see she's in good condition. Amora shrank back against the brick wall, her hands clutching the lapels of Velkin's jacket so hard her knuckles turned white. The way Tidwolf spoke about her, like she was a lost wallet or a stray piece of cattle, made bile rise in her throat. He didn't see a person. He saw a bloodline. He saw property. She is not your investment, Tidwolf, Velkin growled. The sound was so deep it rattled the water in the puddles at their feet. And we didn't find her for you. Tidwolf laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Don't be difficult, boy. I know the Blood Moon holds a grudge, but business is business. She belongs to the Silver Claw. Hand her over, and I might let you leave my city without putting a silver bullet in your skulls. Chapter 12. The threat hung in the wet air, toxic and heavy. A silver bullet. It was the one thing that could permanently end a shifter's life, preventing them from healing. Tidwolf wasn't just posturing. He had come prepared for a war. Amora's survival instinct, honed by years of living on the streets, screamed at her to surrender. If she went with him, he wouldn't kill the twins. She couldn't bear the thought of these two magnificent men, her mates, dying because of her baggage. They had homes, a pack, a life. She was just a runaway waitress. No, Amora whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. She tried to step out from behind the wall of muscle that was Bardolph. Don't hurt them. Before she could finish the sentence, a hand clamped onto her shoulder. It wasn't rough, but it was immovable. Bardolph pushed her back against the brick wall, his grip firm. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed forward on the enemy, but his voice traveled backward to her ear, low and fierce. If you think for 1 second we are letting you walk toward that monster, you don't know what we are, Bardolph said. Stay. Put. She seems willing, gentlemen, Tidwolf called out, tapping his cane against the asphalt. Listen to the girl. She knows her place. She knows she was born to breed for power, not to play house with the North. Velkin stepped forward. He didn't look afraid of the 10 armed enforcers or the silver weapons. He looked bored. He began to unbutton the cuffs of his expensive dress shirt, rolling the sodden fabric up his forearms with agonizing slowness. The movement was casual, precise, and utterly terrifying. You talk a lot for a dead man, Velkin said, his voice devoid of fear. Tidwolf's smile faltered. He gestured to his men. The enforcers took a collective step forward, raising their batons and tire irons. The scent of fear, the enforcers' fear, began to sour the air. They could sense what Amora sensed. The twins were not normal alphas. They were apex predators, radiating an aura of power that felt like standing next to a nuclear reactor. I have 10 men, Tidwolf snarled, losing his patience. You are 2. I have silver. You have nothing but arrogance. Do you really think you can take what belongs to me? Bardolph laughed. It was a dark, chilling sound that had no humor in it. It was the sound of a knife sliding out of a sheath. He mimicked his brother, rolling up his sleeves to reveal thick forearms corded with muscle and veins. You mistake the situation, Tidwolf, Bardolph said softly, stepping up until he was shoulder to shoulder with Velkin. The air around them began to warp, the rain sizzling as their body temperatures skyrocketed in preparation for the shift. We aren't trapped here with you. You are trapped here with us. Velkin tilted his neck, a loud crack echoing as he popped the joint. His eyes were now fully gold, glowing like headlights in the dark alley. "She is not property," Velkin roared, the sound transitioning into a snarl that wasn't human. "She is our queen, and if you want her, old man, come and take her." The ultimatum was delivered. The challenge was set. Tidwolf's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He raised his cane and pointed it at the twins like a spear. "Kill them!" Tidwolf screamed, saliva flying from his lips. "Tear them apart, but leave the girl alive." Chapter 13. The command acted like a starter pistol. The 10 enforcers roared, a cacophony of shouts and shifting bones, and charged the narrow gap where the twins stood. They were fast, fueled by loyalty and fear, closing the distance in seconds. Amora pressed herself flat against the brick wall, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the sickening sound of metal hitting flesh. She expected the twins to be overwhelmed. She expected them to fall under the sheer weight of the numbers. Instead, the air exploded. It started with a sound like tearing canvas, magnified 100 times. It was the sound of expensive Italian wool and cotton shredding under the force of rapid, violent expansion. Velkin and Bardolph didn't wait to be attacked. They launched themselves forward to meet the charge. Mid-stride, their bodies contorted. Bones snapped and lengthened with sickening wet crunches that echoed off the alley walls. Spines elongated, jaws pushed forward, and human skin burst apart to reveal thick, midnight black fur. It wasn't the slow, painful transformation of a weak wolf. It was instantaneous. A seamless transition from man to monster born of mastery and pure rage. By the time their feet hit the ground again, they were no longer men. They were nightmares. 2 massive wolves stood in the rain, easily twice the size of the largest enforcer. They were jet black, darker than the shadows of the alley, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. Their shoulders were mountains of muscle, their claws curved scythes that scraped sparks against the asphalt. But it was their eyes, burning, intelligent, molten gold, that froze the blood in Amora's veins. The lead enforcer, a burly man swinging a tire iron, didn't even have time to scream. Velkin, the larger of the 2 beasts, met him head-on. The collision sounded like a car crash. Velkin didn't bite him. He simply slammed his massive chest into the man, sending him flying backward 20 feet. The enforcer hit the side of the SUV with a bone-shattering crunch and slid down the door, unconscious before he hit the ground. Bardolph was a blur of speed. He moved like liquid smoke. He ducked under a swinging silver baton, his movement so fast it left an afterimage. He snapped his jaws around the attacker's wrist, applying just enough pressure to shatter the bone and force the weapon to drop, then spun and kicked the man into the wall with his hind legs. The remaining 8 enforcers faltered, skidding to a halt on the wet pavement. Their wolf instincts were screaming at them. They had expected a fight. They had not expected this. They were dogs barking at dragons. Velkin let out a roar, a deep, chest-vibrating sound that triggered car alarms 3 blocks away. He bared teeth that looked like white daggers, challenging the entire pack. Amora watched, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide. She should have been terrified. These were monsters of the highest order, killing machines designed by nature to dominate. But as Velkin swiped a clawed hand to shield her from a stray rock, and Bardolph positioned himself to cover her blind spot, she realized the truth. They weren't just monsters. They were her monsters. The shock of the transformation wore off the enforcers quickly, replaced by the fear of Tidwolf's punishment if they failed. With ragged shouts, they shifted into their own wolf forms, mottled browns and grays, mangy compared to the royal black of the twins, and lunged. The massacre began. Chapter 14. It wasn't a fight. A fight implied that both sides had a chance of winning. This was an extermination. The narrow alleyway became a grinder of violence. The rain, which had been clear moments ago, began to run pink as it washed into the gutters. Amora watched, paralyzed by a mixture of horror and awe. She had seen pack fights before, messy brawls over territory or scraps of food. This was different. The twins fought with a terrifying telepathic synchronization. They didn't need to look at each other to know where the other was. They moved as two halves of the same soul. Velkin was the hammer. He was brute force personified. A gray wolf lunged for his throat. Velkin caught it midair, his jaws clamping onto the nape of its neck. He shook his massive head once, a violent snapping motion, and tossed the enemy wolf aside like a rag doll. He plowed through the line of enforcers, using his shoulder to crush ribs and his weight to pin enemies to the ground. Bardolph was the scalpel. He danced through the chaos, untouched. He targeted the tendons, the joints, the weak points. He hamstrung a wolf trying to circle behind Velkin, then spun and swiped his claws across the muzzle of another, blinding it. He was surgical, precise, and absolutely ruthless. Every time an enforcer tried to get close to the brick wall where Amora stood, the twins were there instantly. A black wall of fur and fury would materialize, snapping and snarling until the threat was neutralized. Tidwolf stood by the SUVs, gripping his cane, his face twisting from arrogance to disbelief. He watched his hand-picked elite guard, the strongest fighters in the Silverclaw pack, being dismantled like children fighting grown men. One by one, the enforcers fell. Some lay groaning on the wet asphalt, clutching broken limbs. Others were unconscious. None were dead yet. The twins were being efficient, disabling them permanently rather than wasting time on killing blows. Within 3 minutes, the 10 men were reduced to a pile of broken bodies. The alley fell silent, save for the heavy panting of the wolves and the relentless drumming of the rain. Velkin and Bardolph stood amidst the carnage, their black coats slick with rain and the blood of their enemies. They turned their massive heads toward the SUVs, their golden eyes locking onto the only man left standing, Alpha Tidwolf. Tidwolf took a step back, his cane slipping on the wet pavement. Fear, sharp and acrid, finally broke through his arrogance. He looked at the carnage, then he looked at the twins, and then his eyes darted to the side. He saw Amora. She was standing alone against the wall, separated from the twins by 10 feet of body-strewn pavement. The twins were distracted by their victory, their focus on the fallen men. A cruel, desperate idea formed in Tidwolf's eyes. He knew he couldn't beat the twins, but he could hurt them. He could take the one thing they were fighting for. With a snarl that sounded more animal than human, Tidwolf reached into his trench coat and pulled a long, serrated silver dagger. He didn't charge the twins. He charged Amora. "If I can't have her," Tidwolf screamed, sprinting toward her with surprising speed for a crippled man, "no one will." Amora froze. The silver blade glinted in the headlights, aimed straight for her heart. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She could only watch death coming for her. Chapter 15. The distance between Alpha Tidwolf and Amora was less than 20 feet. In the grand scheme of a hunt, it was nothing. A split second. A heartbeat. Amora saw the silver blade glinting in the harsh headlights. She saw the madness swirling in Tidwolf's eyes, the look of a man who knew he had lost everything and wanted to scorch the earth on his way out. She tried to scramble sideways, to lift her hands in a futile attempt to block the strike, but her limbs felt heavy, weighed down by the shock of the night. "Die!" Tidwolf shrieked, lunging forward, the knife aiming for her ribs. A scream tore from Amora's throat, high and piercing, cutting through the sound of the rain. "No!" The sound acted as a beacon. Bardolph, who had been standing over a groaning enforcer near the SUVs, didn't just turn. He exploded into motion. His hearing, amplified by the shift, had picked up the scuff of Tidwolf's boot and the intake of breath before the scream even started. The massive black wolf launched himself into the air. It was a gravity-defying leap, a blur of muscle and shadow that intercepted the trajectory of the attack. Just as the silver tip of the knife was inches from Amora's jacket, a wall of black fur slammed into Tidwolf. Crunch. Bardolph hit the old alpha midair with the force of a wrecking ball. His jaws snapped shut around Tidwolf's shoulder, crushing bone and muscle instantly. The impact threw Tidwolf sideways, away from Amora, sending the silver knife skittering uselessly across the wet asphalt. Tidwolf hit the ground with a wet thud, screaming in agony, but his nightmare was only beginning. Velkin was there, a nanosecond later. If Bardolph was the shield, Velkin was the sword. The larger twin landed on top of Tidwolf, pinning him to the pavement with paws the size of dinner plates. There was no hesitation, no monologue, no mercy. Velkin snarled, a sound that vibrated in Amora's teeth and buried his fangs in Tidwolf's throat. The scream cut off abruptly. There was a sickening tear, a spray of crimson that misted the rain, and then silence. It was over. The reign of Alpha Tidwolf, the man who had haunted Amora's every waking moment for 3 years, ended not with a war, but with a single, decisive act of protection. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The only sounds were the idling engines of the SUVs, the relentless drumming of the rain, and the ragged breathing of the survivors. The enforcers who were still conscious stopped groaning, freezing in terror as they watched their leader turned into a memory. Amora stood pressed against the brick wall, her chest heaving. She looked at the body of the monster who had tried to enslave her. Then, she looked at the 2 monsters who had saved her. Velkin and Bardolph stood over the fallen Alpha, their chests heaving, steam rising from their wet fur. Their muzzles were stained with justice. They didn't look at the body. They turned in perfect unison to look at her. Their golden eyes were wild, dilated with the after effects of the kill frenzy. They were dangerous. They were lethal. But as they looked at Amora, the gold softened, swirling back into deep, intelligent pools of concern. They lowered their heads slightly, ears flattening, waiting to see if she would run from them. They waited to see if she saw them as saviors or as beasts. Chapter 16. The rain continued to wash over the alley, diluting the blood that stained the pavement, swirling pink into the dark drains. Amora stared at the 2 massive wolves standing before her. Logic dictated she should be terrified. She was a lone female standing in a dead-end alley with 2 apex predators who had just torn a man apart in front of her. But Amora didn't feel fear. Looking at them, at the way Velkin positioned his massive body to block the wind, at the way Bardolph watched the perimeter to ensure no other threats remained, she felt something she hadn't felt since the day she was born. She felt safe. She pushed herself off the wall. Her legs were shaking, but she forced them to move. She took a step toward them, then another. The wolves went rigid. Velkin let out a low whine, a sound so incongruous with his size that it broke Amora's heart. He backed up slightly, dipping his head low as if trying to hide the blood on his muzzle from her. He didn't want to frighten her with his violence. "Don't," Amora whispered, stepping into the rain. "Don't pull away." She reached them. She didn't flinch at the gore. She didn't flinch at the teeth. She raised both hands and placed them on the wolves' heads, one hand on Velkin's broad forehead, the other on Bardolph's sleek neck. The contact was electric. Under her palms, the coarse, wet fur began to recede. The massive bone structures shifted, snapping and reshaping with a fluidity that was almost magical. The heat radiating from them spiked, drying the rain on her skin instantly. Amora closed her eyes, giving them privacy as the shift took them. When she opened them a moment later, the wolves were gone. Kneeling on the wet pavement before her, unashamed of their shredded clothes and the blood on their skin, were Velkin and Bardolph. They were breathtaking. The violence of the fight hung on them like a cloak. But their expressions were shattered open with vulnerability. Velkin reached out, his large hands trembling slightly as he cupped her face. He didn't care about the rain. He didn't care about the enforcers watching from the ground. He only cared about the woman in front of him. "Did he touch you?" Velkin demanded, his voice hoarse, rough with the remnants of the growl. "Did the blade graze you?" Amora shook her head, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She covered his hands with her own, grounding him. "No, he didn't touch me. You didn't let him." Bardolph leaned his forehead against her shoulder, letting out a long, shuddering breath as the adrenaline crashed. He reached out and gripped her waist, needing the physical confirmation that she was alive, that she was real. "We were almost too late," Bardolph murmured, his voice laced with a self-loathing that made Amora ache. "I saw the knife. I thought—" "You were right on time," Amora said firmly. She pulled back to look at both of them, her eyes fierce. "You came for me. No one has ever come for me." Velkin thumbed a tear from her cheek, his golden eyes burning with a possessive intensity that no longer terrified her. "We will always come for you, Amora. You are the breath in our lungs. You are the beat in our hearts. There is no world where we do not find you." Chapter 17. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Human police, or perhaps the city's supernatural cleanup crew responding to the massive discharge of energy. The spell of the moment broke. They couldn't stay here. Velkin stood up, drawing himself to his full, intimidating height. He pulled Amora up with him, keeping her tucked securely against his side. Bardolph rose beside them, his demeanor shifting instantly from vulnerable mate back to efficient alpha. "We need to leave," Bardolph said, scanning the alley. He glanced at the surviving enforcers who were now dragging themselves toward the shadows, terrified of drawing the twins' attention again. "The council will handle the mess. Tidwolf's death was a challenge for territory. It was legal. But I don't want Amora here when the authorities arrive." Velkin nodded. He bent down and scooped Amora into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "You can," Velkin agreed, walking toward the SUVs where their own sleek luxury car was parked just beyond the blockade. "But you never have to walk through blood again if I can help it." He carried her out of the alley, stepping over the wreckage of her past life without looking back. Bardolph opened the rear door of a black sedan that sat idling at the curb, the car they had arrived in before the chaos. The interior was a different world. It smelled of rich leather, expensive cologne, and safety. Velkin settled her onto the back seat and slid in beside her, while Bardolph took the wheel. As the door slammed shut, cutting off the noise of the rain and the sirens, silence enveloped them. Amora shivered, the adrenaline finally leaving her system completely. Bardolph glanced at her in the rearview mirror as he put the car in gear. His eyes were serious. "We are going north," Bardolph said, his voice steady. "To the Blood Moon territory. It's in the mountains. It's fortified. You will be safe there." Amora nodded, clutching Velkin's hand. "Okay. But you need to understand something before we cross the border," Velkin said, turning to face her. He looked intense, his brow furrowed. "Tidwolf called you a breeder. He saw you as a resource." Amora flinched, looking down at her lap. I know. That's what I am. My scent. It's a curse. No, Bardolph said sharply, cutting her off. It is a gift, but it does not define you. Velkin lifted her chin, forcing her to look at him. You are not coming with us to fill a nursery, Amora. You are not coming to be kept in a tower. You are coming as a queen. A queen? Amora whispered. Our pack has 2 alphas, Velkin said, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. But it has been waiting for its matriarch. You will have equal say. You will have equal power. You will command the Legion just as we do. And the mark? Amora asked, the old fear resurfacing. The branding? Never, Bardolph vowed from the front seat. We do not brand our mates like cattle. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, we will exchange bites, a mark of choice, a mark of the soul. But until then, your skin is your own. Amora looked between them. They were offering her the one thing she thought she had lost forever. Agency. They weren't just offering protection. They were offering power. Okay, Amora breathed, a small smile touching her lips for the first time that night. Take me home. Chapter 18. The car glided through the wet streets of the city, a silent phantom moving through the storm. The heating system kicked in, chasing the damp cold from Amora's bones. But the true warmth came from the man beside her, and the man watching over her from the driver's seat. As they turned onto the main road leading out of the industrial district, the headlights swept across a familiar building. Louv's Diner. The neon sign flickered in the rain, buzzing with a sound Amora knew by heart. The windows were steamed up, glowing with a yellow, greasy light. Bardolph slowed the car as they passed. Standing in the open doorway, oblivious to the storm, was Louv. The older woman was wiping her hands on her stained apron, squinting into the darkness. She spotted the sleek black car. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She simply nodded, a sharp, decisive jerk of her chin, and then a rare, genuine smile cracked her weathered face. She knew. Somehow, the human manager who barked orders and docked pay knew that the runaway girl she had sheltered for 3 years was finally free. Amora raised her hand and pressed it against the cool glass of the window, a silent goodbye to the only sanctuary she had known. She was good to you? Velkin asked softly, noticing the gesture. She kept my secrets, Amora replied, her throat tight. She gave me a job when I had no name. She saved me in her own way. Then she will be under the protection of the Blood Moon, Bardolph said, accelerating smoothly as they hit the highway on-ramp. No one will touch her diner. We pay our debts. The city lights began to fade behind them, replaced by the vast open darkness of the highway leading north. The rain began to lighten, the clouds breaking apart to reveal a sliver of the moon. Amora leaned her head back against the leather headrest. She was exhausted, battered, and bruised, but she felt lighter than air. The invisible chains that Tidwolf had forged were gone, left rusting in an alleyway alongside his corpse. She looked at Velkin. He was watching her with a look of reverence, his hand holding hers tightly on the center console. She reached forward and rested her other hand on Bardolph's shoulder. He leaned into her touch instantly, relaxing his grip on the steering wheel. The bond between them, the fated connection that had pulled them across 3 towns, hummed in the air. It wasn't a cage. It was an anchor. I spent 3 years running, Amora whispered, half to herself, half to them. I thought freedom meant being alone. Velkin kissed her temple, his lips warm and promising. And now? Amora looked at the road ahead, winding up toward the mountains where a kingdom waited for her. She looked at her mates, the twin halves of her soul. Now, Amora said, closing her eyes and letting the purr of her wolf fill her chest. I know that freedom isn't about running away. It's about having something worth staying for. She squeezed their hands. I'm ready. Let's go home. As the car sped into the night, carrying the queen and her 2 kings toward the mountains, the storm finally broke, leaving nothing but clear skies and the bright, guiding light of the moon.